Good evening, my moon-blessed wanderer. Come in. Lay your head down. Loosen the weight you carried through the day. If stories like these keep you company in the quiet hours and turn the darkness gentle for you, consider subscribing to Temple, a like, a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from, and what time the night found you. Your feedback shapes the new stories. Now, breathe, slow, unhurried, and let your shoulders fall. Tonight we fall asleep to the tale woven of flowers and fate, of love, betrayal, and quiet, ancient magic. A tale the Welsh bards once whispered beside firelight, while the mountains listened in the dark, but now is widely forgotten. This is the story of Blodeuwedd, the flower-faced bride, and lull, the golden warrior who loved her. Rest now, let the shadows settle around you, as we drift into the dream of Wales. Once upon a time, during the reign of King Math, son of Mathonwy, a grave concern weighed upon the court of Gwynedd. Gwydion, the king's nephew and greatest magician of the realm, came before King Math with a troubled heart, and his young foster son by his side. This youth was Blodeuwedd Lleu, golden-haired and fair, a fine warrior in the making, yet cursed by his own mother, Arianrhod of the Silver Wheel. Arianrhod had refused to acknowledge the boy at birth, and laid 3 times destinies upon him, that he would have no name save one she gave, no arms, weapons, except those she bestowed, and no wife from among the mortal women of this earth. Through trickery and enchantment, Gwydion had forced Arianrhod to fulfill the first 2 destinies. He had duped her into naming the child, Lleu, and later into armoring him as a warrior. But the 3rd curse remained. Lleu was doomed never to wed a human woman. Gwydion addressed King Math in the torchlit hall, his voice earnest and edged with frustration. My lord, my sister Arianrhod's last curse still binds this youth. Lleu shall never have a bride of the race of mankind. Must he then live and die without a partner by his side, through no fault of his own? Math's brow furrowed. The plight of Lleu moved him, for the boy was blameless and had grown into a noble young man, under Gwydion's care. The king knew well the pain of a life without love, and he understood that a lord needed a lady to rule beside him. Math listened gravely as Gwydion continued, We have outwitted my sister before, giving Lleu name and arms despite her wishes. Now we must defy this final tind in a different way. Math's eyes gleamed as an audacious idea took shape. Perhaps we can shape a wife for him by craft and illusion, Math murmured. If no woman of flesh and mortal blood may wed Lleu, then we shall make him one from other flesh, from the flowers of the earth, and the enchantments of our art. Gwydion's face lifted in relief and excitement, for the same notion had occurred to him. They would create a bride through magic, thus satisfying the letter of Arianrhod's curse, while giving Lleu a chance at happiness. The king raised one cautionary hand. Let us proceed, but with care. We meddle with the deep forces of life, Gwydion. There may be consequences we cannot foresee. Math was old and wise, and though his heart was kindly, he respected the balance of nature and magic. Gwydion nodded. His clever mind had considered the risks, but his love for Lleu outweighed them. We shall be prudent, my lord, Gwydion promised. This boy you see before you deserves a chance at love, and I would challenge even the other world itself to grant him that. Math, recalling how Gwydion had already schemed and gambled to help Lleu, tricking Arianrhod into naming her son and arming him, believed that if anyone could pull off such a feat, it was his resourceful nephew. Thus, the 2 master magicians agreed to attempt the unprecedented, to conjure a woman out of blossoms and enchantment. It was spring turning to summer, and the meadows and hills of Gwydion were in bloom. Under a moonlit sky on a sacred hilltop, Math and Gwydion prepared to work their wonder. They gathered blossoms from the finest and most magical plants, bright yellow broom from the hedgerows, humble meadowsweet from the marshy stream sides, and the oaks knew flowers from the mighty trees of the forest. By firelight they arranged the flowers in a circle upon the ground, a living carpet of gold, white and green. Gwydion began to chant in an ancient cadence, singing of the power within root and petal, of life latent in every leaf. Math joined him, and their incantations rose and fell with the night wind. The fragrance of pollen and nectar swirled around them. Gwydion intoned the lineage of each bloom as he cast it into the ring. Blossom of oak, strong and steadfast; blossom of broom, golden and hardy; blossom of meadowsweet, gentle and fair. Grant your virtues to the form we shape. Math, holding his oaken staff, traced glowing symbols in the air over the circle. Slowly, at first, almost imperceptibly, the heaps of blossoms began to move. The flowers quivered as if stirred by a breeze from within the earth, though the night air was still. Then, tendrils of green life unfurled before the onlookers' astonished eyes. The blossoms intertwined and rose, weaving themselves into the form of a maiden, lying upon the grass. Petals of broom became a gown of soft yellow cloth, draped over her limbs. Oak leaves clustered into the shape of long hair, as dark as dusk. Meadowsweet and primrose knit together into fair smooth skin. Math and Gwydion stepped back, as the magic attained a life of its own. The fiery symbols Math had drawn rained down like tiny stars onto the flower form, and where each one touched, it brought a spark of vitality. In moments the outline of a living young woman lay among the oak leaves and blossoms. Her chest rose and fell. She had drawn breath. A soft sigh escaped her lips. The night grew utterly silent, as if the whole forest held its breath in awe. Gwydion and Math exchanged a look of triumph and wonder. The magicians then performed the rites of naming and initiation over their creation, as was customary for any newborn in those days. They baptized her with dew gathered from the flowers that had formed her, whispering ancient words of protection. Then Math spoke the name they had chosen. Blodeuwedd, he declared, voice reverent. In the tongue of Wales, Blodeuwedd means flower face. It was a fitting name for this maiden conjured from blossoms. At the sound, the maiden's eyes opened. Blodeuwedd gazed up at the moonlit sky, and the ring of faces around her, Gwydion, Math and Lleu, with wonderment. Her eyes were the shifting green of a meadow under sunlight, and they glimmered now with the newborn's mixture of curiosity and confusion. Slowly she sat up, petals cascading from her hair and shoulders as she moved. Gwydion stepped forward and draped a cloak gently around her bare, flower-woven form. The night air was warm, but she shivered slightly, not from cold, but from the enormity of her own new existence. Blodeuwedd, who had watched this miracle with widening eyes, now approached hesitantly. Here at last was a bride for him, one not born of mortal womb, thus not forbidden by Arianrhod's doom. He knelt beside her, heart pounding with a mixture of awe and joy. Blodeuwedd turned to him, and when her gaze met his, she smiled softly. In that moment something bloomed between them, as naturally as a bud opening to the sun. They lifted Blodeuwedd to her feet. She stood steady after only a moment, as graceful as if she had been walking all her life. The silken yellow broom flowers that clothed her fell in folds about her figure, modest yet ethereal. Those gathered marveled at her beauty. She was as lovely as any maiden ever seen. Perhaps more so, for an otherworldly quality clung to her, the aura of magic and springtime incarnate. Lleu's face shone with delight and gratitude. All the hardships and loneliness of his young life seemed to melt away as he gently took Blodeuwedd's hand in his. She tilted her head, studying him with an endearing mixture of innocence and interest. Though she did not yet speak, having only just learned the concept of language from the naming, she appeared to understand that this was the man for whom she had been brought into being. That night the court of Math celebrated as never before. Word spread quickly through the castle and the nearby villages that a miracle had occurred. A maiden made of flowers had become Lleu's bride. Math ordered a great feast to welcome Blodeuwedd into the world and into their family. By torchlight, harpers played sweet melodies and storytellers recounted the wondrous event that had just transpired. Blodeuwedd sat at Lleu's side at the high table, observing everything with wide, curious eyes. She knew nothing of the world beyond what had been woven into her by enchantment, and so each sight and sound was new and enthralling. Yet she bore the attention with quiet composure. When courtiers approached to praise her or offer gifts, a brooch of jet, a finely embroidered shawl, she accepted each with a gracious nod, or a shy smile, mimicking the polite behavior she saw in other ladies. Already she was learning. Before the assembled folk, Math formally betrothed Blodeuwedd to Lleu. They joined hands, and the bards pronounced blessings upon the union. Arianrhod's baneful decree was thwarted. Blodeuwedd Lleu now had a wife, albeit a wife not born of human lineage. Seeing his foster son's beaming face as he gazed at Blodeuwedd, Gwydion felt a surge of relief and paternal pride. Perhaps at last Lleu would know happiness and none could call him accursed. After the feast, as midnight approached, Lleu gently escorted Blodeuwedd to the chambers prepared for her. She moved by his side with the poise of a young doe, graceful yet alert. The halls of Bethel, Math's castle, were strange to her, but she showed no fear, trusting Lleu implicitly. At the chamber door, Lleu hesitated, unsure if this maiden, wondrous as she was, felt any true affection for him yet, or merely did as she was bid by her creators. Blodeuwedd looked up at him, and with the simple candor of nature itself, she reached and took his face between her soft hands. She studied his features for a heartbeat, then leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on his cheek. It was a chaste, almost childlike gesture, yet it sent a thrill through Lleu's blood. "Good night, my husband," Blodeuwedd said quietly. Her first words, spoken with a voice like wind over a field of flowers. Lleu, overcome with emotion, could scarcely reply. Blodeuwedd had called him husband, and in her earnest eyes, he sensed a burgeoning tenderness. With that sweet parting, she disappeared into her chamber with her maids. Lleu's gifts remained in the corridor a moment, pressing a hand to the cheek she had kissed, tears of happiness brimming in his eyes. The next day, as the sun climbed over the mountains of Snowdonia, Lleu prepared to depart with Blodeuwedd for his own lands. Gwydion reminded Math of the practicalities. It is not easy for a man to maintain himself without possessions, especially now with a new wife and household to tend. Math agreed readily. "Of a truth it is not," said the king. "I shall give this young man a cantref, a large district of land to rule over, without delay." Math bestowed upon Lleu the cantref of denoting in the region of Ardudyu, a rich land of rivers and hills. Thus endowed with domain and lady, Lleu was well equipped to begin his life as a chieftain in his own right. Math's courtiers and servants assembled in the courtyard to bid farewell to Lleu and Blodeuwedd as they set out for their new home. Some were still awed and perhaps a bit uneasy in Blodeuwedd's presence, for she was clearly of magical origin, yet as she passed among them on Lleu's arm, her smile was so genuine and her laughter so light, that even the skeptical found themselves enchanted. The Flower Bride, as she was affectionately nicknamed, had a way of making those around her feel the world was made anew and full of promise. Lleu and Blodeuwedd traveled south to Ardudwy with a small retinue of loyal attendants. They arrived at Myrcastel, a fortified dwelling perched above the green Sinfell Valley. This fortress would be their home. Local inhabitants lined the road to catch a glimpse of their new lord and his mysterious lady. The tales of Blodeuwedd's uncanny creation had preceded her, and the villagers watched with wide eyes as she rode by, seated on a gentle white horse given by Math. Blodeuwedd, still so new to the world, marveled equally at everything she saw. The humble cottages wreathed in wood smoke, the children waving from doorways, the very sky which seemed vaster now that she was out under it traveling. If she noticed the curious stares, she showed no sign of discomfort. When they reached Mercastel, Lleu helped Blodeuwedd dismount. He saw her gaze sweep over the landscape, the towering oaks and birches clustering on the hillsides, the river shining in the afternoon sun, the fields of heather and grass. She closed her eyes for a moment, and breathed deeply, as if savoring the scents of her kin. For every flower in Ardudwy was, in a sense, her cousin. A gentle smile curved her lips. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. The local people overheard and were delighted. A blessing spoken by the flower maiden seemed a good omen for their land. That evening, Lleu hosted a welcoming banquet in the main hall of Mercastel. He introduced Blodeuwedd to his household and the leading families of the country. She greeted each person graciously, quickly learning the proper words and gestures of courtesy. Within days, the whole cantref was abuzz with praise for Lady Blodeuwedd. Her kindness, her serene beauty, and the almost tangible aura of vitality she brought. Under Lleu's just leadership and Blodeuwedd's gentle influence, the land of Ardudwy prospered and was at peace. The bards sang that no youth was as comely and brave as Lleu Geese, and no maiden as lovely and graceful as Blodeuwedd, the flower-faced bride. As summer turned to autumn in their first year together, it did not escape notice that Blodeuwedd had not yet quickened with child. In a land where heirs meant security, some of Blodeuw's subjects whispered that perhaps the flower maiden could not bear fruit. These murmurs pricked at Blodeuwedd's mind. Once a well-meaning elder woman pressed a charm into her hand, a small doll woven of wheat, a fertility talisman, and suggested she pray for a child. Blodeuwedd thanked her, but inside she felt a sting of emptiness. In truth, a secret dread had grown in her heart, that being made of blossoms and magic and not of flesh, she was a flower that would never bloom into motherhood. At night she dreamt of babes' laughter, echoing hollowly through the castle halls, and woke with tears on her cheek. Lleu, for his part, never reproached her. He seemed content in the moment, perhaps trusting that the gods would provide an heir in time. But Blodeuwedd quietly despaired, wondering if this was another subtle curse upon her, to remain barren despite all her beauty and goodness. It comforted her a little that Lleu did not press the matter. He would simply hold her close on those nights when she woke weeping, unaware of the true cause of her sorrow, and tell her he loved her. Yet even his warmth could not fully dispel the creeping worry that in some fundamental way, she was incomplete as a mortal woman. Despite this private sadness, Blodeuwedd carried out her duties diligently. She learned the rhythms of the household and the land, when farmers planted barley in the vale, when to expect the salmon run in the river, how to administer justice on market days. She accompanied Lleu on tours of the cantref, her mere presence inspiring goodwill. Many noticed that where Blodeuwedd walked, wild flowers often sprang up in her footprints, bright celandine or daisies, as if unable to resist her influence. Indeed, some began to view her as a guardian spirit of the land. So, the months passed gently. Lleu and Blodeuwedd's life together was harmonious, though perhaps lacking the fiery passion of more common romances. To Lleu, Blodeuwedd was the gift he'd never dared dream of. He cherished her deeply, and treated her with unfailing kindness. To Blodeuwedd, Lleu was both husband and teacher. Guiding her in the human world, she felt affection for him, certainly, and gratitude. Yet there was a part of her, born of petals and moonbeams, that remained distant, a wild core that even she did not fully understand. Sometimes, in the pale light of dawn, she would wake and slip from their bed to stand at the open window, gazing at the mist hovering over the valley. At those times, a strange longing stirred within her, as if she were yearning for something nameless. When Lleu would eventually wake and call her name, Blodeuwedd would turn back to him with a tender smile, pushing aside whatever wandering feeling had touched her. Still, a quiet restlessness nested in her soul like a night bird hiding in a blossoming tree. It was the following spring, when fate brought a dramatic change to Blodeuwedd's life, and to Leo's, in the form of an unexpected guest. One bright day Leo received word that King Math needed him to attend a council at Caer Dath. Duty called Leo away for a short time, and he made ready to travel north. Blodeuwedd saw him off with a warm embrace at the gate of Myr Castell. "I shall return before the new moon," Leo promised, as he mounted his horse. He was reluctant to leave her even for a week, but matters of state demanded it. Blodeuwedd waved to him radiant in the morning sun, and watched until his company of riders disappeared into the distant green. A curious flutter of relief stirred in her chest once he was gone, the slightest sense of freedom that she immediately felt guilty for feeling. For the first time since her creation, Blodeuwedd was left to her own devices without Leo by her side. She spent the day wandering the grounds of the castle and the nearby woods with her ladies, savoring the open air. The taste of freedom, however temporary, was sweet. She realized that, devoted as she was to Leo, she had never truly been alone to explore the world on her own terms. Now she paused to listen to birdsong without anyone urging her indoors, and she dipped her hands in the cold, clear stream, laughing as the water trickled through her fingers. Her ladies were delighted to see their mistress in such high spirits. They thought it was simply the fine weather that buoyed her, not understanding the subtle loosening of invisible bonds Blodeuwedd felt. That evening, after supper, Blodeuwedd decided to take a stroll in the castle's apple orchard, a habit she had developed when she needed time to think. She walked among the trees as the sun sank low, her fingertips brushing the white apple blossoms that were just beginning to open. The day had been unusually warm and bright, but now a cooling breeze arrived, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. Blodeuwedd tilted her face to the breeze, closing her eyes, letting her senses fill with the world around her. The birds were making their last chorus before nightfall. Frogs croaked in a nearby pond. Somewhere far off, an owl, one of her kin, though she did not know it yet, gave a tentative hoot. Suddenly the serene evening was pierced by a distant sound, the clear call of a hunting horn. Blodeuwedd's eyes snapped open. The horn's note was rich and bold, echoing off the hills. It spoke of riders, hounds, and chase. A moment later, a commotion stirred at the edge of the orchard. A flash of movement, the crash of underbrush. Then a stag burst into view between the tree trunks. It was a magnificent animal, dappled brown with a proud spread of antlers, its sides heaving in panic. Blodeuwedd gasped softly and stepped behind a tree as the stag barreled past, eyes wide. Hot on its trail came a pair of hounds, lean and baying, followed by mounted huntsmen in green and brown garb. The riders thundered just outside the orchard fence, intent on their quarry. Blodeuwedd caught a glimpse of the leading hunter, a man astride a dapple gray horse, moving with the easy grace of long experience. "Who is that?" Blodeuwedd whispered to one of her ladies in waiting, who had come up behind her. The lady craned her neck to see. "I know not, my lady," she replied, excitement and nervousness mingling in her tone. "They are not of our blood, that's certain." The stag, in its desperate flight, swerved toward the riverbank beyond the orchard. There on a shingled shore the inevitable happened. Exhausted and cornered by the hounds, the creature faltered. The lead huntsman, the man on the gray horse, closed in. Blodeuwedd, peering through the blossoms, saw him raise a hunting spear. With a swift, merciful thrust he felled the stag by the water's edge. The animal's death cry echoed briefly, then was silenced. Blodeuwedd's heart, normally tender, panged at the sound, yet she could not tear her eyes away from the scene unfold. The huntsman dismounted, standing tall by the fallen stag. Now that he was still, Blodeuwedd could observe him more fully. He was no youth, a man in the prime of life, broad-shouldered and weathered from years outdoors. He wore a tunic of deep forest green and high boots, muddied by the chase. His dark hair hung to his shoulders, and even at a distance, she could sense an aura of vigor and confidence about him. He exuded a raw vitality that struck Blodeuwedd like the scent of crushed pine needles. Sharp, natural and invigorating. Light was fading as the huntsman and his companions began tending to their kill, dressing the stag where it lay. Blodeuwedd realized with a start that night was coming on, and these strangers might seek shelter. It would be terribly discourteous to allow a noble visitor to depart Ardjaway at night without offering hospitality. She recalled her manners and told one of her servants, "Go quickly and invite the chief of that hunting party to sup with us, and rest here. We cannot let him leave our land at nightfall without a proper welcome." The servant bowed and hurried off to extend the invitation. Within minutes, the messenger returned. "My lady, the huntsmen say their chieftain is Gran Pedber, Lord of Penlyn, and he gladly accepts your hospitality if offered," he reported. Blodeuwedd's pulse quickened. Gran Pedber. She knew the name. Penlyn was a neighboring realm to the east, around the great lake Tegid, modern Bel. Gran was its lord, a minor king in his own right. What winds of chance had blown him here hunting across her lands while her husband was away? Blodeuwedd composed herself as best she could, and went with her attendants to greet the visitors at the castle gate. The courtyard torches were lit, casting a warm flickering glow on the stone walls. Gran Pedber approached on foot, having left his horse and stag carcass with his men at the gatehouse. He removed his hunting gloves as Blodeuwedd stepped forward to meet him. Thus, for the first time, the flower wife and the Lord of Penlyn stood face to face. The moment Blodeuwedd's eyes met Gran's across the threshold, something shifted in the world. Blodeuwedd felt a sensation like a gust of wind roaring through her mind, though the spring air was still. Gran halted in his stride, clearly struck as well. Blodeuwedd was beautiful, breathtakingly so, in a way no ordinary mortal woman could be, with her petal-soft skin and midnight oak hair, and those luminescent green eyes. But Gran's astonishment was more than that. He who had hunted all his life and prided himself on his sure aim and steady nerve, suddenly felt as though an arrow had pierced his own heart. For Blodeuwedd, who had never known the spark of mortal passion, the sight of Gran was overwhelming. Where Lleu was golden and gentle, this man was dark and stormy-eyed. His presence filled the courtyard. She felt alive in a startling new way, every fiber of her being alert and humming. She stepped forward with a graceful curtsy. "Welcome, Lord Gran, to Ardjaway," she said, voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I regret that my husband, Lord Lleu, is absent, but in his stead I offer you our hospitality this night. Please come in and be our guest." She kept her words formal, as a lady should, but warmth naturally infused them. Gran bowed, his gaze never leaving her face. "My lady, heaven repay your kindness," he replied, a bit haltingly at first. His voice was deep and resonant, still catching its breath from the shock of this encounter. As he straightened, the torchlight played on his features, strong, weathered, handsome in a rugged way, with eyes of flint that now shone with an unexpected softness. For a heartbeat, he and Blodeuwedd simply looked at one another, forgetting the onlookers and the courtesies. In that silence, an unspoken understanding sparked between them, like a flash of lightning in a clear sky. Then one of Gran's men coughed, discreetly, and the spell broke. Blodeuwedd led Gran and a handful of his closest retainers into the great hall. Servants hurried to set additional places at the trestle table, and bring out what food and drink remained from supper. Though unplanned, the feast quickly regained its liveliness with the arrival of the guests. Gran's huntsmen mingled with Blodeuwedd's household guards, exchanging amiable talk of the day's chase. Meanwhile, at the high table, Blodeuwedd and Gran conversed as though in a world of their own. At first they spoke of ordinary things, the richness of Penlyn's forests, the fine hounds he bred, the beauty of Ardjaway's valleys. But beneath these polite exchanges there was a crackling energy. Blodeuwedd hung on Gran's every word, fascinated by his bold, animated descriptions of tracking boar through moonlit woods and spearing salmon in the rapids of the Dee. These were experiences far removed from her sheltered life, and they thrilled her. Gran, for his part, was entranced each time Blodeuwedd laughed, or inclined her head thoughtfully. She moved with such natural elegance, and her face, it was aptly named flower-like, but not in fragility, rather in pure, radiant vitality. After the meal, as was customary, music began, a harpist playing a soft tune. By now, twilight had deepened into night. Torches on the walls cast long shadows. Blodeuwedd and Gran found themselves drawn into more intimate conversation at the far end of the table, speaking in low tones that others could not overhear. Gran complimented the clever governance of Arianrhod and the prosperity he had observed. Blodeuwedd demurred politely, giving credit to Lleu's just rule. At the mention of her husband, a flicker of something passed over Gran's face, perhaps guilt or reluctance, but it vanished when Blodeuwedd poured him another cup of wine with her slender hand and asked about his own family. Gran revealed he was not wed. He had never found a lady to whom he wished to pledge himself. Perhaps I spent too many years roaming the wilds, he joked lightly, but there was an undercurrent of truth. He had certainly not, until this moment, met any woman who stirred his soul. They talked long into the evening, oblivious to the gradual departure of others to their beds. Eventually only a few drowsy servants remained, nodding by the hearth. A gentle rain had begun outside, pattering on the roof. Blodeuwedd realized the late hour and said softly, "My lord, you must be weary from the hunt. Your chamber is prepared whenever you wish to retire." Inside, her heart sank at the thought of him leaving her company, even for sleep. Gran did not rise immediately. He looked at Blodeuwedd intently, as if committing every line of her face to memory. "This has been the most extraordinary of evenings, my lady," he said quietly. He hesitated, then continued with earnestness that made her pulse quicken. "I know not how to express. From the moment I saw you, I felt as though I had been wandering lost, and suddenly found my home." Blodeuwedd's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her in such a way. A flush warmed her cheeks. Her whole life since coming into the world had been scripted, created for Lleu, expected to love him, and him alone. But here, unbidden love, or something like it, had kindled of its own accord, powerful and urgent. "I feel it too," she whispered, her honesty overtaking caution. "In one evening, you have changed everything." At those words, Gran's composure broke. He gently reached out and took Blodeuwedd's hand. She did not pull away. Instead, her fingers intertwined with his, as though they had always belonged together. Both knew how dangerous this was, and yet in that moment, they did not care. They were silent for a long time, simply looking at their joined hands, marveling at the rightness they felt. Blodeuwedd's heart thundered. She felt simultaneously terrified and exalted. This was not something crafted by math or Gwydion spells. It was real, a feeling born entirely from her own self. In discovering love, she was discovering true freedom, and it intoxicated her. The rain outside intensified, drumming on the roof like the heartbeat of the night. Eventually, Blodeuwedd and Gran realized they could not sit thus until dawn, lest they be discovered. With great reluctance they parted hands. "Sleep well, Lady Blodeuwedd," Gran said softly, standing. "Heaven willing, I shall see you with the sun's rise." Blodeuwedd also rose. In a daring impulse, she lifted one of the broom blossoms decorating the hall, and placed it in Gran's hand. "For sweet dreams," she said, her voice like a caress. Gran bowed over her hand, brushing it with his lips just briefly, a gesture that sent a thrill through her entire being. Then he departed to his chamber, the yellow flower tucked close to his heart. Blodeuwedd remained a moment in the empty hall, touching the place on her hand where his kiss lingered. She knew, even if she could not name it aloud, that her life had forever changed in those hours. A seed of desire and destiny had been planted in her soul, and it would soon bloom with a dark and fearsome beauty. That night, unable to sleep, Blodeuwedd paced her bedchamber, replaying every word and glance between her and Gran. Rain gusted against the shutter. Her maidservant, drowsy by the hearth, finally ventured, "My lady, are you unwell?" Blodeuwedd started, realizing she must contain herself. "I am fine," she lied gently. "Only restless. The storm disturbs me." The maid offered a sleeping draught, which Blodeuwedd declined. Eventually she dismissed the girl. Alone, Blodeuwedd pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the window. What was she to do? She was Blodeuwedd, bound by law and honor. Yet every fiber of her being yearned for grunt pepper with a force that astonished and frightened her. Outside, lightning flickered, illuminating the courtyard where she had first seen him. With that lightning came a decision, flashing clear and irrevocable. She could not let this new love slip away. It was as if nature itself, which had given her life, now demanded she follow her heart's true desire. Consequences be damned. The next morning dawned gray but calm, after the night's rain. True to his word, Graun did not depart at first light. He and his men remained as guests in Ardudry for 3 days, claiming they wished to wait for better weather to carry their venison home. In truth, everyone guessed another reason held him, everyone except perhaps Blodeuwedd's own household, who were largely innocent-minded and did not suspect their lady capable of betrayal. Over those days, Blodeuwedd and Graun were inseparable, though they took care to maintain an appearance of propriety in public. They walked together in the gardens, speaking of poetry and philosophy. They convened small hunts for game in the woods, where they could steal moments alone amidst the trees. By the end of the 3rd day they had passed beyond mere infatuation into something fervent and consuming. On the 3rd night, as custom dictated for noble guests, Blodeuwedd ensured Graun was given the honor of sleeping in the main hall on a luxurious feather mattress, and she quietly arranged that her own bedchamber door remain unbarred. When all in the castle were asleep, Graun slipped through the shadows to Blodeuwedd's room, drawn as if by an irresistible magnetic force. There, under cover of darkness, Blodeuwedd and Graun consummated the love that had ignited so swiftly between them. They became lovers in truth, their bodies entwining with an urgency and passion that Blodeuwedd had never known in her gentle life with Lleu. For 3 nights in a row, Blodeuwedd and Graun spent their nights together in secret bliss. According to the customs of medieval Wales, a man and woman bedding each other for 3 consecutive nights could be considered as good as married in the eyes of society, and indeed, in their hearts Blodeuwedd and Graun felt bound together as deeply as if a priest had blessed their union. Under that castle roof, which ironically sheltered Lleu's marital bed, the two forged plans for the future. They spoke in hushed whispers about how they might stay together always. By the dim glow of the banked fire with Graun's arms around her, Blodeuwedd dared to imagine a life where she could live and love freely, not as an artifact of magic given to one man, but as a woman who chose her own fate. On the morning of the 4th day, Graun knew he could delay no longer without arousing serious suspicion. Word might reach Lleu that Penlyn's lord tarried unusually long in his absence. With great reluctance the lovers prepared to part. In the pre-dawn gloom, they embraced for what felt like hours in Blodeuwedd's chamber. "How can I leave you?" Graun murmured into her hair. "My heart stays here." Blodeuwedd fought tears. "Go for now," she whispered, voice breaking, "so that you may return without reproach." They both knew Blodeuwedd was expected back soon. They needed a plan before that time. They had already discussed it in detail. Lleu would have to die. It was the only way. Blodeuwedd had awakened to a love and a life she wanted for herself. A life with Graun, and her husband stood in the way of that future. Likewise, Graun desired not only Blodeuwedd, but also power. With Lleu gone, he and Blodeuwedd could rule Ardudwy together, uniting it with Penlyn. On the face of it, the idea of murdering Lleu was horrifying to Blodeuwedd. Lleu, who had been nothing but kind to her. Yet each time her resolve wavered, the thought of returning to an existence where she belonged to Lleu, and could never see Graun again, hardened her heart anew. In their secret talks, Graun assured her that this was their only hope. "If there were any other way, by heaven, I would take it," he said, holding her close on the final night. "But Lleu will never let you go. Not while he lives. Could you endure being with him after this?" pretending nothing has changed. Blodeuwedd knew she could not. Something in her nature, some wild element born of blossoms and now fanned into flame by passion, rebelled at the idea of returning meekly to her former life. She who had been shaped to please someone, had tasted the freedom of pleasing herself. She could not go back into a gilded cage. Thus, before Ground's departure that dawn, the lovers sealed their pact. They would engineer Lleu's death, and remove him from their path. Blodeuwedd would have to be the instrument, coaxing from Lleu the secret of any vulnerability he possessed. For rumor had it, and Ground knew by experience from the ill-fated spear cast, that nearly ended in a miraculous eagle, that Lleu Gevsevs, was no easy man to kill. He bore a charm or destiny that protected him from ordinary harm. Blodeuwedd's arts, and Arianrhod's blood, made him something more than mortal in resilience. But every enchantment has its loophole. If anyone could learn Lleu's weakness, it would be the woman at his side. Blodeuwedd agreed to do it, though the prospect made her hands tremble. "He trusts me," she said quietly, guilt and determination warring in her chest. "I shall find a way." Ground pressed a dagger into her palm, not to use on Lleu, but as a token of the resolve they must both hold. "For us, Cariad, beloved," he said, using a Welsh endearment that made her soul ache. Blodeuwedd nodded, tears glinting in her eyes, and hid the dagger in a drawer. They parted at dawn, with a final lingering kiss in the shadows of a postern gate. Ground slipped out to join his men, who had been none the wiser to his nocturnal activities. The Lord of Penlyn rode away from Mercastel, under grey skies, leaving Blodeuwedd standing atop the battlements watching after him, a lone golden figure with flowers in her hair. To the retainers, it seemed merely a courteous farewell. None could guess at the storm of emotion within her. Love, dread, anticipation of what must be done. Thus was set in motion a chain of events that would bring tragedy to them all. Not many days later, Lleu Gifts returned to Mercastel from King Math's council, unaware of the wildfire that had ignited in his absence. Blodeuwedd ran to greet him as he rode in at twilight, embracing him warmly before all the household. To Lleu nothing seemed amiss. His wife's welcome was as sweet as ever, her smile as gentle. Yet that evening, once they had supped and retired to their private chamber, Blodeuwedd's demeanor grew unnaturally subdued. As they prepared for bed, Lleu attempted light conversation, recounting a humorous mishap on the road. But Blodeuwedd scarcely responded. When they lay together beneath the firs, she turned her back to him, silent and tense. He spoke to her once, then a second time she offered only monosyllables, confused and concerned. Lleu finally laid a hand on her shoulder. "What ails you, love? Are you unwell?" he asked softly. Blodeuwedd did not face him. After a moment she replied in a trembling voice, "I have been thinking of something you likely never think about. Your death." "My death?" Lleu echoed, startled. Blodeuwedd took a shuddering breath and continued, "It haunts me, the idea that you might be taken from me too soon. I worry for you constantly, my lord." Her words came out low and halting, like a confession. In truth, what haunted her was the plan to cause his death, but she cloaked it in a show of wifely anxiety. Lleu's heart melted at her display of concern. He drew her gently into his arms, spooning her against his chest. "Ah, Cariad, heaven reward your care for me," he murmured. "Tut, but unless heaven itself decides my time is done, I shall not be easily slain." He smiled in the dim light, completely unaware of her true meaning. Lleu was renowned for his near invincibility. To him her fear was baseless and sweet, yet Blodeuwedd only nestled stiffly in his embrace. Her face turned away as if still troubled. She allowed a silence, then spoke again. "For my sake, tell me truly, by what means could you be killed? I only wish to know so that I can guard you better. My memory is keen. If you share your secret weakness, I will watch over it zealously." Lleu hesitated. This was perilous knowledge, but Blodeuwedd had never given him a reason to distrust her. On the contrary, Her loving devotion was such that she must be asking out of genuine fear for his safety. He kissed the crown of her head gently. "If it will ease your mind, my dear, I will tell you gladly," he said, stroking her hair. "Understand, it is not easy to kill me by any common means. No warrior could simply cut me down in battle." Blodeuwedd closed her eyes, straining to keep her breathing even. This was it. The secret she needed to betray him. She listened with every fiber of her being. Lleu continued calmly, "To slay me, one would have to work a very specific charm against me. It would be necessary to spend an entire year crafting a spear in secret, doing no work on it, except during the sacred time of the sacrifice on Sundays, when others are at Mass. Only such a spear, forged with those prohibitions, could strike true." Blodeuwedd's heart thumped. A year forging a spear on Sundays. Yes, she would remember that. But she said nothing, letting him explain further. "And even then," Lleu said, "the weapon alone would not avail unless I could be caught at a most unlikely moment. I cannot be killed indoors, nor outdoors. I cannot be killed on horseback, nor on foot." He smiled into the darkness, expecting she would find these conditions absurd, and thus be comforted. But Blodeuwedd, controlling her voice, asked, "Not indoors or out, not riding or walking. How can that be possible?" Lleu chuckled softly. "Exactly so. It is nearly impossible. But there is one way around it," he conceded. "If someone were to contrive a situation that meets certain extraordinary criteria, then, and only then, could I be killed. Listen well, Blodeuwedd, for this is what you fear to know. I could only be slain by a spear that has been a year in the making, and then only while I am positioned in a very peculiar state. It would require me to stand beside a river, with one foot on the rim of a bath cauldron, and the other foot on the back of a billy goat brought there, and with a thatched roof without walls constructed over me. If I were in such a position, neither indoors nor outdoors, neither on horseback nor on foot, then a strike from that carefully crafted spear could bring about my death. Otherwise," and here he kissed her temple reassuringly, "I am as safe as a man can be." Blodeuwedd made herself exhale slowly, as though relieved. She even allowed a small laugh. "That is so specific I can scarce believe it," she said. "Who would think to arrange such a thing? A bath by a river, a goat, a roof with no walls. It is almost nonsense." "Just so," Lleu agreed with a smile. "And now you see, Enwelled, beloved, that it will be easy to avoid such circumstances. You need not worry for me. Until heaven calls me, I shall not easily be slain." He squeezed her gently, believing the matter settled. Blodeuwedd swallowed. Her mouth had gone dry. She forced herself to turn in his arms and face him, hoping the darkness concealed the turmoil in her eyes. "Forgive my foolish fears," she murmured. "Truly, you have eased my mind." She reached up and caressed his cheek. "Come, let us sleep. I will trouble you about this no more." Lleu felt enormous tenderness well up for his wife. He embraced her, whispering endearments, and soon fell asleep, comforted by the thought that he had banished her worry. But Blodeuwedd lay awake far into the night, wide-eyed and tense, silently repeating to herself each detail of Lleu's impossible death, so that she would not forget. A spear forged over a year of Sundays, dusk by the river, roof with no walls, 1 foot on a tub, 1 on a goat. She turned the riddles over and over in her mind, committing them to memory. By the time the first hint of dawn light crept under the door, Blodeuwedd had fixed the entire formula firmly in her thoughts. She knew what must be done. At the first opportunity that day, Blodeuwedd sent a message to Grandpepper in Penling. She wrote it in careful, ciphered words, in case it fell into wrong hands, on a small scrap of parchment, and sealed it with green wax. In it she relayed all that Lleu had revealed. "Our target stands only by a cauldron, under a thatched canopy and upon a buck-goat's back. Can he be brought low by a spear crafted for a year in holy moments?" She folded the message into a tiny packet, and gave it to her most trusted page, a lad who had grown up at Mercastil, and adored his lady. Ride to Penlyn with haste, she instructed him privately. Deliver this letter into the hands of Lord Grun himself. Speak of it to no one else. Our Lord Lleu must not know. The page bowed and promised, eyes shining with excitement at the secret task. And by noon he had slipped out of the castle, and was galloping east. Meanwhile Blodeuwedd returned to her daily life with Lleu, acting as though nothing had changed. If Lleu noticed that she had been strangely anxious the night before but now seemed cheerful again, he attributed it to the easing of her worries. He was pleased to see her smile and assumed all was well. Yet beneath her composed exterior, Blodeuwedd's heart pounded with anticipation and dread in equal measure. The knowledge of Lleu's unique vulnerability was a heavy burden, but it was also the key to her freedom with Grun. Grun Pebber received Blodeuwedd's secret missive, under the cover of darkness, in the solitude of his private chamber. As he deciphered her coded words, a fierce grin spread across his face. So this was the secret of the nearly invincible Lleu. It was as bizarre as rumored, but now that he knew it seemed almost laughably attainable. He read and reread the instructions, then pressed the letter to his lips in gratitude for Blodeuwedd's cunning. Without losing a moment, Grun summoned the most skilled smith in his domain, and confided to him a task of utmost importance. Deep in the smithy of Penlyn, they began that very week to forge a new spear in absolute secrecy. Only Grun, the smith, and a handful of loyal guards even knew of the project. Every Sunday at dawn, when the bells rang for mass across the countryside, the smith worked on the spear, hammering and shaping its iron head, while Grun himself stood guard. They dared not do any work on it outside those sacred hours, as per the requirements. Each strike of hammer on anvil during those stolen moments rang with fatal purpose. The rest of the week, the unfinished spear lay hidden under boards in the forge, waiting for the next Sabbath. Back in Ardui, Blodeuwedd waited through that long year in a state of taut impatience. By day she went about her duties, as Lady of the Cantref, attentive and gracious, betraying not a hint of the treacherous thoughts coiled in her breast. By night, however, her mind raced with longing for Grun and the fate she was weaving. Often she would start from sleep, thinking she heard hoofbeats, perhaps Lleu returning unexpectedly from a journey, or worse, someone coming to expose her plotting, but each time it was only the wind or some harmless nocturnal sound. The strain was considerable. More than once, Blodeuwedd nearly lost her nerve. In those moments, she would find an excuse to ride out beyond the castle's sight, to a quiet glen, where she could cry or scream her conflicted feelings into the indifferent wood. The hawthorn and birch trees listened without judgment. When she returned, her eyes would be red but resolute anew. Lleu, for his part, noticed nothing amiss. He remained utterly confident in his wife's loyalty and love. He knew of no reason to suspect her. She had given him none. If occasionally she seemed distant, he assumed it was due to her adjustment to mortal life, or residual worry about his safety. He would kiss her brow and reassure her again that he was not fated to die easily. Blodeuwedd would respond with a wan smile and a gentle touch. Guilt gnawed at her in those tender moments, but then she would recall the intoxicating passion of Grun's embrace, and steel herself. She began to view Lleu as an obstacle, a mountain blocking her path to happiness. It became easier, as time went on, to harden her heart against him. Still, on certain nights when Lleu spoke kindly to her or brought her a gift of a trinket from his travels, tears would prick her eyes and she would feign a headache to hide them. The lovers did not dare meet in person during that dangerous year. Mercastel was full of watchful eyes, and any further visits from Grun would arouse suspicion. However, they found ways to communicate. Now and then, Blodeuwedd would send a trusted maid to the market in a town on the border, or by prearrangement one of Grun's men would deliver a short letter or token. Likewise, a falcon from Penlyn occasionally arrived at Mercastel bearing a tiny scroll tied to its leg, ostensibly a courtesy message about hunting rights or border matters. In truth, within these missives, Graun and Blodeuwedd poured out their yearning and kept each other apprised of their progress. Each secret letter strengthened their resolve and renewed their courage to see the plot through. The lovers spent that year apart. But one moonless night, in late summer, Blodeuwedd could bear the separation no longer. Under the pretense of a pilgrimage to a distant shrine, she slipped away from Mercastel with only one maid, and made for a hidden glade on the border of Ardought and Penly. There, beneath ancient oaks and a sky bursting with stars, Graun Pebber met her in secret. The two rushed into each other's arms, trembling with the mingled joy and anguish of reunion. For a time they simply held each other, cherishing the brief respite from loneliness. In the darkness they shared whispered words and urgent kisses. Graun told her of the spear's progress, how each Sunday's labor brought them closer to their goal, and he vowed the weapon would not fail when the moment came. Blodeuwedd held him close, cheek against his warm chest, and confessed her fears. "I feel every day as though the walls are closing around me," she murmured. "Blodeuwedd grows suspicious of nothing, yet my own guilt torments me." Graun stroked her hair and soothed her. "Our trial is almost over, my flower. Hold fast a little longer. Soon we shall be free of this lie and rule together, openly." They spent that stolen night, nestled together in a bed of fern and heather, drawing strength from each other's presence. By dawn they parted once more, Blodeuwedd returning to her role at Lludw's side, and Graun to his lonely plotting, both fortified by the promise that their love would ultimately triumph over the perilous charade. The wheel of seasons turned. Autumn's leaves fell, winter's snows blanketed the valleys, and then spring came again with new growth and hope. With it came the culmination of Graun and Blodeuwedd's scheme. At the end of the year the spear was complete, a cruel heavy weapon of iron and ashwood, tempered in secret fires and quenched in dark waters. Graun's smith had poured all his skill into it. Graun himself added a final sinister touch. He smeared the spearhead with adder's venom, and the juices of poisonous herbs, ensuring that even a scratch would fester, and a true wound would mean certain death. When the spear was ready, Graun sent Blodeuwedd a simple message. "The tool is made." Blodeuwedd received this news with grim relief. It was time to act. From here everything moved quickly. By fortunate coincidence, or perhaps by fate's design, Blodeuwedd announced that he intended to go to the river Sinfell on the upcoming evening, to bathe, a habit he had, believing the river's waters kept him healthy and strong. Blodeuwedd's heart leapt. This was the chance to orchestrate the exact conditions needed for the killing blow. She pretended to be merely attentive and excited at the prospect of joining him for a riverside excursion. All day she oversaw servants, as they prepared a bathing hut by the riverbank at her request, a sort of outdoor shelter for Lludw's comfort. Of course she remembered to have them leave the sides completely open, constructing only a thatched roof on poles above a large cauldron tub filled with water. At her bidding they placed the tub exactly on the border of river and land, a liminal spot neither indoors nor outdoors she made sure the workmen fastened the roof securely without walls just as required. Next she had one of the castle's bully goats caught from the herd. It was a rangy black buck with curling horns, strong and sure-footed. Blodeuwedd ordered it to be tethered near the bathing site. The servants exchanged puzzled glances at that, but she explained lightly that the goat would be a ritual prop to amuse her husband. Lleu enjoyed such playful things, she said. None dared question further, for she spoke with an authority that few had heard from her before. By late afternoon, all was ready. The roof tub stood by the river's edge, steam rising from the hot water within, and a goat bleated softly as it nibbled grass nearby. Across the river, concealed in the trees on a low hill, named Bryn Cyphagir, Hill of Watching, Graun Pebber, and a couple of his best men, lay in wait, having slipped into Ardought under cover of the previous night. They observed every preparation keenly. When Graun saw the makeshift roof and the goat being staked out, his pulse quickened. The trap was being set perfectly, and Blodeuwedd was carrying out her part with precision. Sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and pink. At the appointed time, Blodeuwedd approached Lleu. "Husband, everything is prepared by the river for your evening bath," she said, linking her arm in his. "Shall we go down?" Lleu smiled affectionately. He was pleased to see her taking such interest. "Certainly. Let us see this fine bathhouse you've arranged. Together they walked from the castle down a gentle slope toward the Simfal's bank. Blodeuwedd's breath came quick and shallow, though she struggled to appear calm. A strange quiet had fallen over the scene, as though nature itself anticipated what was about to happen. Dusk crept in, neither full day nor full night, wrapping the valley in dim enchanted light. When they arrived at the riverside, Lleu surveyed the setup in amusement. The thatch roof looked like an open gazebo with no walls, perched right beside the flowing water. Beneath it sat a great cauldron brimming with hot water, its surface reflecting the twilight sky. A tethered goat stood not far off, chewing placidly. Lleu chuckled. "My dear, you have outdone yourself in creativity," he said. "This is quite the elaborate bath." Blodeuwedd forced a light laugh. "I thought it would put my worries fully to rest if I saw how impossible the scenario you described truly is," she replied, summoning a playful tone. "Indulge me, my lord. Show me exactly how you demonstrated standing with one foot on a bath's rim, and one on a goat, under a roof with no walls. I still can't quite picture it, and it would ease my mind to see it with my own eyes." Lleu found her earnestness endearing, and he still felt a bit guilty for causing her any distress at all. "Of course, if it pleases you," he said kindly. He doffed his tunic and stepped into the steaming tub, relaxing for a moment in the warm water. "Ah," he sighed. This was a fine idea regardless. After he had soaked a short while, he rose glistening from the cauldron bath and wrapped a towel around his waist. "Now then," he said with a good-natured grin, "to show my beloved how ridiculous these conditions truly are." Blodeuwedd stood by, heart pounding so fiercely she was sure he must hear it. She cast a quick glance across the river but saw nothing in the gathering gloom. Yet she knew Gron was there, poised like a drawn bowstring. She had to make this perfect. "Let me fetch the goat closer," she offered, voice somehow steady. She led the compliant buck right beside the tub, then stepped back. "So, my lord, how would one stand? One foot on the edge, like this?" Lleu, thoroughly enjoying humoring her, climbed half out of the cauldron. "Exactly so," he said. He planted his right foot on the thick wooden rim of the bath, and the other foot, he continued, "goes here, on the goat's back." The servants had caught one of the more docile billy goats, so the creature merely shifted a bit, as Lleu carefully placed his left foot between its shoulders. The scene was absurd. A tall man balanced with one leg on a bath, and one on a goat, under a small thatched canopy open to the air. Lleu spread his arms slightly for balance and gave Blodeuwedd a reassuring smile. "You see, it would take someone truly devious to get me in such a position. Besides you, my dear, who have done it out of love." He winked, clearly finding no threat here. Blodeuwedd returned a tight smile. The moment had come. Her hands clenched involuntarily at her sides, nails biting into her palms. She felt time slow to a crawl. The goat flicked its ears and bleated softly at the weight on its back. The river murmured over its stones. The last ray of sun slipped below the horizon. It was the in-between time. Neither day nor night, and Lleu gifts stood poised exactly as the prophecy required. On the wooded hill across the river, Gron waited in hiding, barely daring to breathe. He had chosen a perch on Bryn's cipher gear from which he had a clear line of sight to the bathing area. His hands tightened around the leather-wrapped shaft of the enchanted spear. As he watched Blodeuwedd lead Lleu into position, Gron's heart hammered against his rib. This was the moment upon which all his hopes hung. His mouth went dry when he saw Lleu stand precariously with one foot on the basin, and one on the goat's back, under the flimsy thatched roof. Drawing back his arm, Gron took aim like a hunter sighting a stag. Except this shot had to be perfect. In that breath of time he prayed silently to whatever powers might be listening, that this one cast would end it all, and secure their freedom. "Lord, I have been thinking how it is possible that what thou didst tell me formerly can be true. Wilt thou show me exactly how you could stand as you described, if I prepare the bath for thee?" Blodeuwedd suddenly called out, in truth to mask any noise from the assassin. Lleu laughed and opened his mouth to answer. He never got the chance. At that precise moment, from across the darkling river, a shape blurred through the air. It was the spear, flying with lethal speed from Gron's hand. The enchanted weapon whistled as it pierced the twilight. In an eye blink before Lleu could react or even comprehend, the spear struck. Its poisoned head punched into Lleu's bare side, the exact spot Gron had aimed for, and burst out the other side of his ribcage. For an instant all was still. Lleu's eyes went wide in shock. Both feet slipped from their perches. He staggered one step backward, the long ash shaft of the spear now protruding grotesquely from his torso. Blue-eyed gasped loudly, part of the act, though also from genuine horror at the sight, and ran to him as if to help. Then Lleu screamed. It was a hideous primal shriek of pain and astonishment, the cry of a proud stag struck down in its prime. The sound echoed off the rocks and sent flocks of birds bursting from nearby trees in alarm. In Mercastel, servants came rushing to windows. Blodeuwedd, reaching Lleu's side, was nearly knocked off her feet as he convulsed. With the last of his strength, Lleu instinctively leapt away from the source of agony. In doing so, he fulfilled a destiny even stranger than anyone imagined. A transformation unfolded. Lleu's body shimmered and twisted, bones reshaping, skin sprouting feathers. In a heartbeat, where the stricken man had stood now flapped a great wounded eagle. Its feathers were the burnished gold-brown of autumn bracken, but they were matted with blood. The spear jutted grotesquely from the eagle's flank, and as the bird beat its wings in panic, blood sprayed across the stones and into the river. Blodeuwedd fell back, truly shocked despite all her planning. She watched in disbelief as the grievously injured eagle that was Lleu struggled into the air. With a frightful screech, half human, half beast, it flapped its broad wings and rose, trailing drops of red that spattered Blodeuwedd's gown. The eagle ascended awkwardly, fighting for altitude, and then soared off into the gathering night. Within moments it vanished toward the distant oak-covered hills of Snowdonia, leaving only a few drifting feathers behind. Lleu's gifts had literally slipped from their grasp in a way none anticipated. The spear had done its work, yet he was not a corpse at Blodeuwedd's feet. He was gone, taken by some sorcery or miracle neither she nor Gron had foreseen. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Blodeuwedd stood trembling, her hands pressed to her mouth, staring at the blood-slick stones where Lleu had been. Could he somehow survive even this, she wondered in fear. Was the prophecy still unfulfilled because he did not die as a man? Across the river, Gron emerged cautiously from the trees, equally stunned by the turn of events. He had expected to see Lleu slain on the ground. Instead he had witnessed an uncanny metamorphosis. For a moment, a flicker of superstitious dread passed through Gron. Had they struck down not a man, but a god, a being protected by ancient magic? But as he looked around and saw no sign of the eagle's return, he set aside those qualms. Lleu was as good as dead. A bird so grievously wounded could not survive long. The aim now should be to secure the advantage quickly. Blodeuwedd recovered her wits and ran to Gron, who was fording the river's shallow edge to reach her. They met on the blood-stained bank. Rain began to fall in fat droplets, as if the sky itself wept, or perhaps tried to wash away the sin of what had occurred. Gron clasped Blodeuwedd's hands, searching her face. Both were spattered with Lleu's blood. Blodeuwedd felt a sob rising in her throat, part relief, part horror, and Gron gently pulled her into an embrace. "It is done," he whispered fiercely. "He is gone." Blodeuwedd shuddered in his arms, and nodded against his chest, tears finally spilling. Whether she wept from joy at their success, or sorrow for the man she had betrayed, even she could not say. Perhaps it was both. That night, Blodeuwedd and Gron occupied Mercastel together. In the chaos following Lleu's inexplicable disappearance, Gron moved swiftly. He and his men crossed the river and entered the castle, weapons drawn, ready to fight if needed. But there was little resistance. The household had seen Lleu struck by a spear and then transformed into a bird of omen. They were terrified, confused, leaderless. Gron's reputation as a warrior was known, and many assumed he had somehow vanquished their lord by powerful magic. When Gron strode into the hall with Blodeuwedd by his side, he acted every inch the conquering chieftain. He loudly proclaimed to the assembly that Lleu had been struck down for his negligence, a pretext, as none understood the real reason, and that henceforth he, Graham de Burzum, would rule Blodeuwedd with Blodeuwedd as his late. Without their lord, or any clear chain of command, the garrison's morale collapsed. Math's warriors swarmed over the walls, and through the gates before midnight. After a brief clash of swords in the courtyard, the few defenders who remained threw down their arms and yielded, preferring mercy to a futile death. By dawn the red dragon banner of Math flew atop Mercastel, proclaiming Lleu's triumph even before he arrived in person. That same night, a few of Lleu's most loyal men slipped away under cover of darkness, determined to bring word of these events to King Math and to Gwydion in the north. But the majority of the household, seeing no alternative, submitted to Graham. They were practical folk. If Lleu was truly gone, and given the shower of blood and feathers, it seemed he was either dead or cursed into a wild creature, then better to accept the new lord who offered stability. Graham promised that those who served him faithfully would be rewarded, and that Lady Blodeuwedd's gentle hand would ensure continuity. So by sunrise messages had been dispatched to Penlyn, informing them that their lord now also ruled Blodeuwedd, and preparations were underway to formally merge the two domains under Graham's leadership. Blodeuwedd moved through these developments in a daze. A strange, heavy numbness filled her. The adrenaline of the murder attempt had drained away, and the reality of what she had done settled like a cold stone in her stomach. She stood by Graham's side as he took possession of Lleu's high seat in the hall, her face pale but composed. Servants hurried to clean the riverbank of blood and retrieve Lleu's abandoned clothing and personal items. There was no body to bury, which would become a subject of fearful whispers among them. That day, news spread across Ardots that Lleu's soul, Lawgethis, was gone, taken by enchantment, some said, and that Graham and Blodeuwedd had assumed rule. Some small folk muttered darkly, suspecting treachery, but with no proof and no champion to oppose Graham, they held their tongue. For a brief moment it seemed Graham and Blodeuwedd had triumphed. By the second day after Lleu's fall, they were effectively ruling Ardots together. Graham wasted no time in moving his own men into key positions, and he sent emissaries to King Math with carefully crafted words, expressing sorrow at Lleu's mysterious fate, and a willingness to administer Ardots in Math's name. Blodeuwedd played her part as well, appearing before the people tearful yet resolute, claiming that Lleu had been struck by a curse, and that Graham's taking charge was in the best interest of the country. Some of Lleu's folk accepted this at face value. Others suspected Blodeuwedd had a hand in whatever had happened. After all, it was known that she orchestrated the scene by the river, but none dared accuse their lady outright. She was beloved by many, and even those who doubted her could not reconcile the kindly flower face with the notion of a scheming murderess. Moreover, the uncanny nature of Lleu's disappearance made people attribute it to magic and fate, rather than mortal plotting. In truth, the months of Blodeuwedd and Graham's rule had been filled with an undercurrent of unease. The people of Ardots had accepted the new lord and lady outwardly, but the land did not flourish under them as it had before. The summer after Lleu's fall brought scant rain, the harvest was meager, and many muttered that it was a sign the very earth resented the blood spilt unfairly. Blodeuwedd found little joy even with her lover at her side on the throne. Guilt and apprehension shadowed every step she took in Lleu's halls. She would wake from nightmares of an eagle's scream or a baby's cry, and find Graham holding her concern in his eyes. In those quiet moments, she could not meet his gaze, for fear he'd see the remorse she felt. Now with Lleu seemingly vanquished and their ambitions achieved, one would expect Blodeuwedd to feel elation. Instead she felt empty. The forbidden love that had burned so hot still bound her to Graham. She did love him, but the cost of it weighed on her soul. Perhaps in time she would heal from the ugliness of the deed and fully embrace their life together. She told herself that repeatedly, and yet, at odd moments, a memory of Lleu's trusting smile, or a snatch of a song he used to hum, would drift through her mind and prickle her conscience. On those occasions, she would set her jaw and banish the thought. Lleu is gone, she would remind herself. What's done is done. Little did Blodeuwedd realize that the end of Lud's story had not yet been written. Far to the north, at Calardathel, King Math and Gwydion received shocking tidings. Blodeuwedd Lleu was missing, possibly dead, and Gronpapfer had usurped his lands. One of Lud's loyal messengers, who had ridden day and night, delivered the news. When Math heard that his beloved nephew had come to harm, great sorrow and anger overcame him, but upon Gwydion the greatest weight fell. Gwydion's eyes flashed with fury and fear. This was his foster son, the boy he had created Blodeuwedd to protect and make happy, and now that very creation had, so it seemed, betrayed and destroyed him. Gwydion's grief quickly turned to action. Lord, I shall never rest until I have tidings of Ludus, whether he be alive or dead. Gwydion swore to King Math. Math, heavy-hearted, gave Gwydion leave to do whatever he must to find the truth, and if possible save Lud. Math himself began gathering a war host, for regardless of Lud's fate, the treachery of Gron could not go unanswered. Gwydion set forth at once, riding south with only a few hand-picked companions. He traveled in many guises and took indirect routes to avoid alerting Gron. From one town to the next, he sniffed out rumors. It did not take long to confirm that Blodeuwedd and Gron had indeed conspired. Discreet whispers named Blodeuwedd as the one who lured Lud to the river, under false pretenses. Some even claimed she was a witch who turned her husband into a bird. Gwydion's stomach churned with hurt and rage at these accounts. He recalled Blodeuwedd's first innocent days, and felt a stab of guilt. Had he created a monster unwittingly? Shaking off the thought, he pressed on. As Gwydion neared Ardudwy, he dismissed his companions. He wished to move swiftly and secretly. Dressed as a simple bard, he entered the fringes of Lleu's former domain. Villagers were frightened and tight-lipped under Gron's new regime, but Gwydion had a gift for coaxing information. At an inn, after buying a few rounds of ale, he drew out an old farmer who'd been at the riverside the day Lleu vanished. The trembling man described the spear, the scream, and the eagle flying off. "An eagle, you say?" Gwydion asked sharply. "Aye. Flew up toward the mountains. We found no body, just blood," the man quavered. Hope flared in Gwydion's heart. Blood there was, and likely a grievous wound. But if Lleu had shapeshifted, perhaps by some innate magic or by the grace of his divine lineage, for indeed unknown to many, Lleu had the blood of the old gods in his veins, then he might still be clinging to life. Gwydion left the inn determined to find that eagle. If Lleu yet lived in any form, Gwydion would restore him, or die trying. Following the third tengd of Arianrhod, that Lleu shall not have a human wife. Math and Gwydion had conjured blue. Now Gwydion followed another thread of destiny laid by Arianrhod, for the goddess of the silver wheel was associated with owls and fate. Perhaps she had a hand yet in where Lleu's life hung. Gwydion rode hard into the mountains of Eri. Guided by instinct and an obscure tracking spell, he murmured under his breath. Day after day he searched glens and peaks. Eventually he came upon a region where none of the locals dared venture. They spoke of a monstrous eagle that roosted in an old oak, dripping rotten flesh and blood. Gwydion's heart pounded at this tale. He followed their directions to a secluded valley, where the river Nantel flowed. It was said a Gwyugi, spectral hound, led travelers there astray, but Gwydion needed no guide except his love for Lleu. At twilight he found what he sought. High in the largest oak tree in the valley, Gwydion spied a gigantic eagle perched among the bare upper branch. The sight brought tears to his eyes, for it was a pitiful thing, feathers molting, wings drooping, and from its side hung strips of decayed flesh. Beneath the tree, a sow, a pig, was devouring pieces of carrion that fell every time the eagle shifted. Gwydion approached cautiously. He recognized at once that this was Lleu, his essence, if not his human form. Though nearly dead, the eagle's eyes still glinted with a trace of human soul, and Gwydion could see the broken spear embedded in its side. Stifling a sob, he called out softly, "Lleu, my boy, Is it you up there? The eagle gave no response but a low croak. The spear wound had putrefied, and the creature was more dead than alive, shaking with fever. Realizing words alone would not call Leo back, Gwydion decided to use the magic of song. He knew many Englinian, short, riddle-like verses of power, with a voice trembling first with emotion, then steadied by will. Gwydion began to chant in England to address the eagle. Oak that grows between two banks, darkened is the sky and hill. Shall I not tell him by his wounds that this is Lleu? His voice echoed through the glade. The eagle above cocked its head, as if hearing something familiar. It shifted on the branch, causing more rotten flesh to slough off and fall. The sow gobbled these noisily. Gwydion watched closely. The eagle flapped down one tier of branches. Now it was perched a bit lower than before. Encouraged, Gwydion sang a second England, louder. Oak that grows on upland ground, is it not wet by rain? Has it not been drenched by 90 tempests? It bears in its branches Lleu gifts. As the haunting words rang out, the great bird let out a pained shriek. It half glided, half fell further down the oak, catching itself on a mid-level branch. Now Gwydion could see the eagle's form more clearly, see the gaunt, ragged state of it, the way mites and maggots crawled on its flesh. Tears streamed down Gwydion's cheeks at the sight of what had become of the vibrant young man he loved as a son. Yet he steeled himself for the final effort. Lifting his face toward the canopy, he chanted the third England, voice rich with command. Oak that grows beneath the steep, stately, and majestic is its aspect. Shall I not speak it? Lleu shall come to my lap. Upon the last syllable, a shimmer of enchantment rippled through the valley. The eagle gave a heart-rending cry, a mixture of agony and yearning. Then, with a burst of energy, it launched off the branch and swooped down toward Gwydion. Gwydion stood his ground, arms outstretched. The giant bird descended and collapsed into his embrace. Gwydion immediately drew his sword, and, with one careful stroke, smashed the spear shaft, dislodging the iron head from the wound. The eagle screeched weakly. Gwydion then laid his hand on the creature's bloodied feathers, and spoke a charm of transformation, tapping the oak tree thrice with his staff for power. In a swirl of light and a rush of wind, the form of the eagle twisted and shrank. The filthy feathers fell away. Gwydion suddenly found himself kneeling on the ground, cradling the naked body of Lleu, restored to human shape. But what a sight he was! Thin as a skeleton, skin gray and clammy, body covered in half-healed gashes and sores. He was alive, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Yet it looked as if only sheer will and Gwydion's summons had kept his soul tethered to his flesh. This long, no one ever saw a more piteous sight. For Lleu was nothing but skin and bone. Gwydion choked back a sob and gently brushed the matted hair from Lleu's hollow face. Lleu's eyes fluttered open, dull and clouded with suffering. For a moment he looked up uncomprehendingly at Gwydion. Then recognition sparked. "Uncle," he croaked, voice barely audible. Gwydion smiled through his tears. "Yes, dear boy, I have you now." He pulled a cloak from his pack and wrapped it around Lleu's emaciated form. Lleu shivered violently, from weakness and shock. Gwydion held him close as one would hold a wounded child. "Rest easy, Lleu. You are safe," he murmured. Though in truth he knew they were far from safe until they got home. The saw that had been devouring the eagle's flesh wandered over, grunting. Gwydion actually laughed, a wild, relieved laugh, and tossed the saw the remnants of the eagle's carcass, whatever rotten bits were left of the magical shape. "There's the last of your meal, Sister Pig," he said, shooing her kindly. He then stood, lifting Lleu in his arms. The young man weighed hardly more than a bundle of sticks. That sent a fresh wave of rage through Gwydion. Rage at Blodeuwedd Lleu for bringing Lleu to this state. and at himself for not foreseeing and preventing it. "We will set this right," he whispered to the barely conscious Lleu as he carried him to his horse. "By the gods, those who did this to you will pay." Lleu made no response, his head lolled against Gwydion's chest, eyes closed, a tear leaking from one corner. Gwydion feared he might yet die. Thus began a slow and urgent journey back toward Caer-Dethel. Gwydion did not risk going near civilized areas, lest Graun's allies discover them. Instead, he traveled through lonely paths, stopping often to tend to Lleu. On the second night, they took shelter in a shepherd's abandoned hut, high in the hills. There, by the light of a peat fire, Gwydion examined Lleu's wound. It was foul. The spear had been poisoned indeed. Gwydion cleaned it as best he could with mountain herbs and fresh water. All night he stayed awake, whispering healing charms over his nephew, coaxing the fever to break. Sometime before dawn, Lleu's eyes opened again. He gripped Gwydion's hand weakly. Blodeuwedd," he rasped, tears spilling anew. Gwydion shushed him gently. "Do not speak of it yet. Save your strength, Lleu. Vengeance will be yours soon." Lleu's face contorted in heartbreak. "Why?" was all he managed to whisper. Gwydion had no answer that could salve that wound. He simply held Lleu's hand, and in that quiet hut the two wept together, one for a love lost, the other for an innocence shattered. But sorrow soon hardened into determination. By the time Gwydion delivered Lleu into the care of mass healers at Caer-Dethel, a fierce need for justice burned in the young man's soul. It took many weeks for Lleu to recover from his physical injuries. King Math's physicians used all manner of poultices and tonics to purge the poison and knit the torn flesh. Gwydion lent his own magic, singing restorative songs each morning at Lleu's bedside. Slowly, color returned to Lleu's cheeks and strength to his limbs. During this time, Gwydion often saw Lleu start from sleep, crying out Blodeuwedd's name in anguish, or even reaching out for something unseen, perhaps the phantom of that eagle shape he had worn. Whenever this happened, Gwydion would soothe him with calm words and a hand on his shoulder. One evening, as Gwydion kept watch by the hearth, Lleu stirred from a troubled doze and beckoned weakly. Gwydion leaned in. Lleu's voice was raw but intelligible. "Why, uncle? Why did she do it?" It was the question Gwydion had asked himself 100 times. He swallowed, lacking a true answer. "I do not know, dear one," he replied softly, stroking Lleu's hair, as a father might. Sometimes even the wisest cannot fathom the heart. A tear rolled down Lleu's cheek. "I loved her," he whispered, voice cracking. Gwydion's own eyes welled. "I know," he said. He could think of nothing else to say that mattered. He simply kept vigil while Lleu wept silently, exhausted by grief and betrayal. When Lleu had fallen back into a fitful slumber, Gwydion whispered a vow into the silence. "They will pay, Lleu. By the gods of our people, I will see them pay." As days turned to weeks, a change came over Lleu. The initial storm of emotions, hurt, confusion, loss, settled into a cold resolve. He spoke little of Blodeuwedd or of love. Instead, he focused on regaining his prowess with single-minded intensity. He practiced walking longer each day, then wielding a sword to strengthen his arms. Though still healing, he insisted on training drills with Gwydion in the courtyard, as soon as he could stand without swooning. Anger and humiliation fueled him. If thoughts of his flower-faced wife's betrayal pained him, he turned that pain into fuel for vengeance. By late summer, Lleu Gifts emerged from his convalescence, a changed man, leaner, harder, and utterly intent on retribution. "It is full time now that I have retribution on him by whom I have suffered all this woe," he declared to King Math one morning. Math, who had loved Lleu like a foster son himself, nodded gravely. "Truly," he said, "the hour has come." They called the banners of Gwydion to war. From every cantref under Math's rule, warriors answered the summons, eager to punish the treachery of Penllyn and restore Lleu to his rightful seat. A great host assembled, proud men with spears and shields, polished bright, marching under mass royal stand. The sight of Lleu riding at the head of the army, alive and grimly determined, sparked awe in the ranks. Many thought him dead. Seeing him restored was taken as a sign that righteousness favored their cause. Gwydion rode beside him, a fierce smile on his lips. He had his nephew back, and soon those who wronged him would feel the wrath of the House of Dawn. As the war band advanced into Ardudwy, they met little organized resistance. Graun Pebber had known this reckoning might come, but he could not muster enough support to face Math's might in open battle. Upon learning that Lleu lived and was marching on him, Graun's courage crumbled. He barricaded himself within Mark Castell, and sent out emissaries carrying pleas for mercy and lavish offers of tribute if Math and Lleu would spare him. But Lleu refused any payment or negotiation. He would accept no Golan as blood price for this offense. Only blood for blood. His message to Graun was stark. The Lord of Penlan must face him one-on-one, as he had faced death by Graun's hand. Realizing that resistance was hopeless, Graun nonetheless sought to save himself by diplomacy. Graun was soon captured and dragged in chains before King Math's war council. There, beneath Math's striped war tent, he was forced to kneel in the mud before Lleu. With desperation in his eyes, Graun groveled. "Mercy, Lord," he cried, tears mingling with rain on his face. "Spare my life and I shall yield Penlan and Ardudwy both, and pay whatever tribute you desire, gold, cattle, name your price." The assembled nobles looked to Lleu. Only months before, Lleu had been the gentlest of souls, but suffering had sharpened him. He regarded Graun in silence, expression stony. When Graun finished his pleading, Lleu spoke, voice calm and cold. "Did you grant me any mercy, Graun Pebber, when you hurled your spear from the shadows?" Graun opened his mouth, fumbling for a defense that did not exist. Lleu continued, "All the riches in the world cannot wash my blood from your hands." Lleu stepped forward, looming over the trembling prisoner. "No, there will be no bargain," he said, loud enough for all to hear. Graun blanched. A collective breath was held in the tent. "But," Lleu added, "I will give you one chance to meet me as a man. You shall stand where I stood, and face the same blow you dealt me. That is the only restitution I will accept." A stunned silence followed his pronouncement. Graun's face went ashen. Math inclined his head in grim approval. The old laws of Sifeander. Justice would thus be satisfied. Talion. The repayment of identical harm. Thus by Lleu's will, it was decided. On the following morn, at the very spot by the river Sinfell, where Graun had struck him, Lleu would return the favor. The story spread like wildfire among the armies and locals. The Lord of Penlan was to be a living target for Lleu's spear. Some thought it cruel, some thought it more than fair, but none could deny it was a fitting poetic end. Graun, who had boasted of his marksmanship, would now stand at the receiving end of a cast. They marched Graun Pebber, bound and under heavy guard, to the river Sinfell's bank where the fateful event was to occur. It was late afternoon, nearly a year to the day since Lleu's ambush. Rain clouds loomed, the air thick with the scent of impending storm. Wordlessly, Lleu began to prepare. He removed his cloak and tunic despite the chill, for he wanted nothing to hinder his throat. Graun handed him a great war spear, the very same spear some say that Graun had crafted for that murderous purpose, retrieved from the oak after Gradin found Lleu. Others claim Math's smiths forged a new one, especially for this moment. Either way, its tip was honed sharp as wrath itself. Graun was unbound, and led to stand on the riverbank, exactly where Lleu had once balanced on the tub's edge. The ground was still marked by the hoofprints of that day, and some of Lleu's blood had forever stained a stone with a ruddy hue. A hush fell upon those gathered. Graun Pebber, usually proud and fearless, was now shaking visibly. He tried one last time to save his skin. "Lord Lleu," he called across the space between them, his voice breaking, "before you strike I beg a final boon. Let me place a large stone between us. If truly your cast is fated to kill me, It will pierce the stone and all. If not, perhaps it will turn aside and spare me. This request some thought was craven, but others felt a pang of pity. Not low. He stared at ground with eyes like chips of ice. For a long moment he did not answer. The wind gusted, rattling the oak leaves around them. At last, Lleu gave a single nod. Very well. Take your stone. Perhaps Lleu allowed this out of a warrior's decency, or perhaps to show that even the earth itself could not shield Gran from his vengeance. Eager to seize any chance of survival, Gran's men rolled a great slab of slate from the hillside and propped it up before their lord. It was a mighty stone as tall as a man's shoulder, and several inches thick. Gran positioned himself directly behind it by the waters. He pressed his back flat against it, squeezing his eyes shut in terror. None of Gran's retainers volunteered to take his place, for his earlier cowardice had cost him their respect. He was alone with his doom. Lleu raised his spear, testing its weight, though fully healed. His side still ached, where Gran's spear had torn through. That ache flared now, fueling the strength in his arm. Overhead thunder rumbled, as if the heavens themselves attended this grim ceremony. In the eerie half-light, for the sun was behind storm clouds, Lleu took aim. Across the river, Gwydion watched intently, heart heavy but resolute. King Math observed with solemn approval. This was safe yonder, true justice being fulfilled. For an instant, time seemed frozen. All eyes were on Lleu, the golden warrior reborn from tragedy, drawing back his powerful arm. Then, with a shout that carried all his anguish and fury, Lleu hurled the spear. The weapon flew straight and swift as destiny. The whistling of its iron head through the air sliced the silence. Gran heard it, and reflexively crouched behind the slab, cowering. The spear struck the center of the slate with a resounding crack, like a lightning bolt smiting stone. The great slab shuddered. A collective gasp arose. A heartbeat later, an awful scream rang out from behind the stone. To the shock of all, Lleu's cast had indeed pierced the slab through. The long ash shaft now quivered grotesquely, sticking out from the slate, and on its far end, just visible, blood dripped fresh. Gran's scream choked off into a gurgle. With a loud thud, the slab toppled forward onto the stony ground, revealing Gran Pibber's body pinned beneath. The spear had punched through the stone and into his chest, transfixing him exactly as his own weapon had transfixed Lleu. A stunned hush fell. Then one of Lleu's men let out a cheer which was quickly joined by others. Lleu walked across the stream to the fallen stone, which now had a clean circular hole right through its center, a testament to the strength of his throw. Beyond it lay Gran's corpse, eyes staring sightlessly at the darkening sky. Lleu gazed down at his enemy without triumph, without pity, only grim finality. He did not bother to retrieve the spear. He let it stand protruding from Gran's chest, a monument to justice. In that moment a weight lifted from Lleu's heart. The very stone that failed to shield Gran would stand forever as proof of what had happened here. Indeed, in years to come people would call that perforated slab Lleu's Gran's stone, and it can still be seen by the Senfield's banks, an enduring symbol of betrayal avenged.
And what of Blodeuwedd during these events? As soon as Mathos neared Ardodwy, fear overwhelmed her. For many months, Blodeuwedd had maintained a facade of regal confidence beside Gram, but the return of Blodeuwedd, like a ghost risen, shattered her nerves. The same day that Blodeuwedd's forces marched in, Blodeuwedd chose flight over capture. Without waiting for Gram's further counsel, Blodeuwedd resolved to run. Only a few hours earlier, as scouts brought news of Math's approaching army, Gram had paced the great hall in desperation. "We can fortify the castle," he told Blodeuwedd with frantic hope. "Perhaps Math will treat with us. If Blodeuwedd, maybe he can be appeased with tribute." He trailed off, watching her. Blodeuwedd sat rigid on the high seat, hands clenched white in her lap, offering no reply. She felt frozen inside. Every possible fate too terrible to voice. Misreading her silence, Gron knelt and grasped her hands. "Fear not," he said, forcing a smile he did not feel. "I will fight to my last breath for us." He pressed a kiss to her cold finger. Blodeuwedd managed a faint nod, her throat too tight with dread to speak. Bolstered by what he took for her blessing, Gron had risen to rally his men for a hopeless defense, leaving her alone with her maids and her terror. Now, standing atop the walls and seeing the enemy torches like fallen stars encircling her, Blodeuwedd's waning courage finally shattered. In the dark of that night, as the sounds of battle and Gwydine's sorcery echoed from below, Blodeuwedd gathered her 7 closest ladies-in-waiting and fled out a postern gate. She still wore her golden silk gown stained here and there with Blodeuwed's dried blood, and a simple circlet. Her maids carried torches to light the way. As they all hurried into the wild hills, they did not know exactly where to go, only away from Gwydine's wrath and Blodeuwed's righteous anger. The moon hid behind clouds, offering scant light. Ahead lay thick forests and treacherous bogs, but fear drove them onward. As they ascended a slope toward the mountains, screams and clashing swords sounded faintly from Murcastle behind them. The castle was falling to Math's host. Blodeuwedd bit back a sob of panic and urged her companions forward. Quickly, this way. They reached the banks of a swollen stream that rushed down from the heights. The only way across was a slippery log. One by one, the terrified maidens began to pick their way over, casting frightened looks over their shoulders. Blodeuwedd remained last, struggling with the heavy skirts of her gown. Far below, at the castle, she could see flickers of orange, roofs set aflame, and she imagined Gwydine's keen eyes searching for her. The crossing proved fatal for her handmaids. As they traversed the log bridge, one maid lost her footing, falling into the torrent with a scream. Another, looking back in horror, stumbled too, dragging 2 more with her in a panicked tangle. "Wait!" cried Blodeuwedd, reaching out in vain. The log, slick with moss, bobbed violently and threw the remaining 3 maids into the current. The women's screams echoed briefly, then were silenced by the roar of water. The river swept their flailing forms into a deep, dark pool at a bend. Blodeuwedd could only watch in helpless despair, as bubbles and ripples marked where her 7 loyal attendants sank. Not a single one surfaced. All drowned, whether from the river's wrath or from sheer terror, and the quiet pool swallowed their lives without a trace. Ever after, that pool was called Lyn Morwynion, the Lake of the Maidens, in memory of Blodeuwedd's handmaids who perished that night. Blodeuwedd stood on the bank, drenched in cold spray, her face a mask of grief. These women had followed her faithfully, and now they paid for her sins with their lives. She nearly collapsed in anguish, but a distant horn spurred her on. Gwydion was close behind. Forcing her legs to move, Blodeuwedd fled alone into the deepest reaches of the mountain. She ran through briar and bramble, stumbling, bleeding, rain mingling with the tears on her cheeks. She felt as though the very night was pursuing her with unseen claws. Eventually she emerged onto a high ridge beneath the looming peak of Craig Urdina. There stood the ruins of an ancient court, perhaps an old hunting lodge, its stone walls roofless and overgrown with ivy. Blodeuwedd slipped inside the crumbling shelter to catch her breath. Behind her, ominous silence. Even the night creatures had gone still. In that silence, the sound of footsteps became dreadfully loud. Blodeuwedd whirled to see Gwydion standing in the broken doorway. A single torch he carried cast jagged shadows on his face. He wore a dark cloak, and his eyes glittered like a hunting owl's in the firelight. Blodeuwedd's courage, already drained, failed entirely. She backed away until her shoulders pressed against the wet stone of the ruin's wall. Gwydion advanced slowly, sword drawn but held low. Rain dripped from his hood onto the floor. For a long moment, neither spoke. Blodeuwedd could hear only her own ragged breathing, and the pounding of her heart. She knew the look in Gwydion's eyes. It was the fury of a creator, whose creation had betrayed him, the rage of an uncle, whose beloved nephew was nearly slain. Finally, Gwydion's voice came, soft and devoid of warmth. "Have you anything to say, Blodeuwedd?" He used her name, but it sounded like an accusation, not an endearment. Blodeuwedd opened her mouth,
but her voice cracked. I beg mercy, she managed in a shattered whisper. At that, Gwydion's composure snapped. Mercy, he hissed. Did you show Lleu mercy, girl? He who did nothing but cherish you. He who was the very reason you exist. His sword arm trembled with barely restrained wrath. Blodeuwedd flinched, guilt flooding through her. I cannot undo what I have done, she said, a sob in her throat. I was not made for these feelings.
Silence, Gwydion roared, his voice echoing off the stone. Blodeuwedd cringed. For a moment, Gwydion's face worked as if he might indeed strike her down, then and there. But after an agonizing pause, he mastered himself. No, he said coldly. I shall not kill you, Blodeuwedd. That would be too simple an end. He stepped forward and raised his free hand. Blodeuwedd pressed back against the wall, eyes widening in fresh terror. She recognized the gathering of power around him. The very air in the ruin crackled with it. Gwydion pronounced her doom like a judge of the other world. I will do unto you worse than death. I will transform you into a creature that fits your nature. You will become a bird of the night, so that your face shall never again be seen in the light of day. Because of the shame you have brought upon Blodeuwedd, you will not dare show your face by sunlight. All other birds will shun and despise you, and harry you wherever you fly. And you shall keep the name you have, Blodeuwedd Flowerface. But in the language of today, your name will forevermore mean owl. Blodeuwedd's knees buckled as the curse took hold. She screamed, a raw, piercing sound, as her body began to contort. Her arms twisted painfully and sprouted brown feathers. Her fingers sharpened, turning to hooked talons that scraped the stone. Her face, once so lovely, pushed outward and narrowed into the heart-shaped disc of an owl. Her eyes enlarged into round golden orbs that blinked in confusion and fear. With a last human sob that became an animal screech, Blodeuwedd fell forward, no longer a woman, but an owl flapping awkwardly amid the pile of her discarded clothing. The owl blinked at the torchlight, instinctively skittering away from Gwydion. The sorcerer lowered his sword, satisfied and yet strangely sad. Fly, Blodeuwedd, he said, voice echoing in the sudden quiet. Fly to the shadows where you belong, and know that you are accursed by your own name. He stepped aside to give the bird passage. The owl that had been Blodeuwedd let out a trembling hoot and took wing. It darted out of the ruin into the stormy night. Gwydion watched as it flew low over the hillside. Almost immediately, a mob of small birds, sparrows and wrens awakened by the commotion, set upon the owl, chirping furiously and diving to peck at it. The owl fled into darkness, hounded by these tiny avengers, until Gwydion could see it no more. He stood alone in the rain, a great weariness overtaking him. The deed was done. Blodeuwedd was punished, neither dead nor truly alive as a person, doomed to lonely night. Gwydion whispered into the wet wind, a final line of judgment. And thus is Blodeuwedd, Flowerface, known as the owl henceforth, hated by all birds. The empty ruins swallowed his word. In the morning, when Math's men found Gwydion, he was gazing solemnly at a silent lake, not far from the ruins. 7 pale faces seemed to bob just beneath its surface, like water lilies, an eerie illusion that vanished when ripples disturbed the water. Gwydion turned to his king, and said simply, "It is done. Blodeuwedd will trouble no one again." None dared ask for details. Those who had witnessed the aftermath at the ruin spoke only of a great owl seen flying away. The lake below was thereafter called Lleu, the Lake of the Maidens, for it held the memory of innocent blood spilled in fear. As for the hold stone on the Senfile, through which Lleu's spear had passed to kill Gran, it remained a physical reminder of loyalty and treachery. Locals would tell how Lleu's strength put a hole in one throw through an inch of solid rock. That stone, the Lleu, Gran's, stands to this day. It was on the bank of the river Sinfel that Lleu reclaimed his honor. With a single mighty cast of his spear, Gran Pepper, who had begged for mercy, was granted only the slight grace of a stone to hide behind. It availed him nothing. The spear of Lleu, thrown with uncanny skill and all the strength of righteous anger, pierced the slab of stone and struck Gran through, killing him instantly. In that moment, Lleu felt the dark shadow of his betrayal lift.
He stood over his rival's lifeless body and found no joy in it. Only a grim satisfaction that balance had been restored. His enemy was gone, his oath of vengeance fulfilled. Warriors on both sides lowered their weapons, awed by the display. There was no more fight left. The conflict ended as swiftly as it began. They buried grown pepper in a cairn on the hillside, overlooking the water. Blodeuwedd's absence and presumed transformation meant there was none left to claim Penlyn's leadership, but Gron's kin, who readily bent the knee to Math and Lleu. Ardudu and Penlyn were thus reclaimed into Math's peace. Math offered Lleu Gron's lands of Penlyn to rule as well, but Lleu declined, content to hold only Ardudu. He had no desire to oversee the place where his sorrows were seated. Instead, Math bestowed Penlyn on a noble family loyal to Gwynedd. As for the stone through which Lleu's spear had passed, it was left where it fell, with the gaping hole testifying to the deed. People came from miles around to see it in years following, astonished at how a warrior's throw could punch through solid rock. It stood like a monument, and indeed, in the tongue of the land it became known as Lleu Gron, or Lleu Gron. Grons. The story says that if one peers through the hole toward the river at sunset, one can faintly make out a red stain on a certain stone in the water, the very spot where Lleu bled into the stream. Thus nature itself bore witness to the tale, and those physical reminders ensured that the name of Lleu Lleu and the treachery of Blodeuwedd and Gron would never be forgotten.
With Gron's death, Lleu's lands and honor were fully restored. King Math embraced his nephew with pride and sorrow mingled. No one in Britain has ever suffered such a fate and reclaimed their dignity as you have, Lleu, the king declared. Lleu bowed but said humbly, I have you and my lord Gwydion to thank for my life and victory. Gwydion, standing nearby, managed a small smile. He was immeasurably relieved to see his nephew alive and whole, but the entire episode weighed heavily on him, a creation of his making. Blodeuwedd had nearly destroyed Lleu and been destroyed in turn. The balance of his feelings was complex: regret, anger, and a lingering sadness. Yet he clapped Lleu on the shoulder and said, You have proven yourself truly worthy of your name. Skillful hand by the cast of that spear. May there never again be cause for such a demonstration. Lleu inclined his head. Let this chapter be closed, he agreed quietly. In his heart an ache remained where once a gentle love had lived, the place that belonged to the flower-faced maiden who was no more. But Lleu was wise enough to not speak of that. He let the pain be folded away among his private memories. In time, peace and normalcy returned to Ardudu. The fields grew green again, and harvests were abundant. It was as if the land itself sighed in relief once Lleu was back in place, as though the sickness wrought by betrayal had been purged. People rarely spoke Blodeuwedd's name except in hushed tones, for to mention her was to invite bad luck. An old superstition arose. If an owl hooted near a house at night, they said, Away with you, Blodeuwedd, cursed one, lest the owl bring ill omen. Indeed, Blodeuwedd came to mean owl in the common speech, and owls were regarded with a mixture of fear and pity, remembering that once long ago an owl had been a fair woman, who made a terrible choice. Thus ends the sorrowful saga of Blodeuwedd and Lleu, one of the most tragic and haunting tales in the cycle of Welsh mythology. The tale, having wound through creation, love, betrayal, death, and transformation, leaves us with lessons as complex as its characters. In its conclusion there is both justice and heartbreak, for though balance was restored, it was at the cost of innocence and love. Lleu survived the ordeal that fate and treachery thrust upon him. He continued to rule Ardudu under King Math's aegis. Accounts say that Lleu became a wise and just lord, beloved by his people once more. Yet, those close to him noted that he was never quite the same carefree soul he had been before. He took no new wife. How could he, after the strange destiny he had lived through? Some bards whispered that no mortal woman could match the unearthly beauty of Blodeuwedd, and others that Lleu's heart simply never recovered.
Lleu poured his energy into governance and into honing his skills in battle and craft. In later centuries, Lleu's name lived on in honor. He had faced unimaginable betrayal and not only survived but reclaimed his dignity and lordship. The stone with the hole, Lleu'r ground, remained by the river Sinfell as a silent witness to his revenge. Villagers from generations after would show it to curious travelers, recounting how Lleu's spear had pierced it through and felled the Lord of Penllyn, a warning to any who would betray their lord's trust. King Math grew old and eventually passed the throne of Gwynedd to his heir. Gwydion returned to his own lands of Gwyned's cantrefs and to his study of the mystical arts. Outwardly, he was celebrated as a hero, the clever magician who had saved Lleu and punished the perfidious wife. Yet within Gwydion's heart there lingered a shadow of guilt and regret. In quiet moments, he would recall Blodeuwedd's first days, how innocent and eager to please she had been, and he would wonder if things might have gone differently had he given her true free will, or guided her more gently. He realized too late that he had fashioned a living woman, but expected her to be no more than a doll. He had not anticipated that Blodeuwedd might have desires of her own, beyond the purpose he and Math had instilled. This awareness troubled Gwydion's later years. Some say it drove him to a kind of hermitage in the end, as he pondered the ethics of creation and meddling with life. But such are philosophical matters, and the legends do not dwell long on Gwydion's introspection. And what of Blodeuwedd, the woman conjured from flowers, who became an owl? In the immediate aftermath of her transformation, the owl Blodeuwedd flew far, far away from any human habitation. True to Gwydion's curse, she found that every bird that saw her launched into attack. Crows dive-bombed her, songbirds chased her relentlessly by day, so she became wholly nocturnal, hiding in dark forests by day and venturing out only at night to hunt. The owl's natural instincts overtook much of her mind, which was perhaps a mercy. It spared her the constant agony of remembering all she had lost. Yet at quiet midnight moments when she sat on a lonely branch beneath the stars, who can say that some glimmer of the woman she had been did not surface in those round amber eyes? The bards imagined that she remembered in flashes the feel of sunlight on her face, or the echo of her name called in love. Such memories would bring a wave of sorrow, and her owl cry would become an eerie, mournful sound drifting through the trees. Thus the countryside came to associate the hooting of an owl with a feeling of sadness and eerie lamentation. The cry of Blodeuwedd, some called it, in whispers.
Over time, some Welsh villagers came to view Blodeuwedd's fate not only as a punishment, but as a strange transformation that gave her a different kind of power. They noted that flowers need the sun to bloom, whereas the owl lives under the moon. In that sense, Gwydion's curse was poetic justice. The Maiden of Flowers became a creature, exiled from daylight, from the sun's domain, forever. She who once danced in sunlight, now could only haunt the night. But there is another interpretation. Some of the wise claimed that Blodeuwedd's change was also a form of liberation. As an owl she was free of the bonds that men, Math, Gwydion, Lleu, even Gron tried to place on her. She flew under the moon, beholden to no husband or lord, feared by many but also respected, as a predator of the dusk. The owl is a bird of knowledge, some say, and in becoming an owl Blodeuwedd found her wisdom, going from an innocent flower maiden, who knew nothing but being the wife she was created to be, to a solitary night creature, who sees in darkness. In that reading, her punishment carries an ironic gift of insight and autonomy. Blodeuwedd's story did not end with her owl's flight from Ardurdues, at least not in the hearts of the people. Folks continued to speak of her in hushed tones. In the centuries that followed, bards and storytellers retold the tale of the flower bride and her tragic choices, ensuring it would not be forgotten. Mothers would caution their daughters with it: do not betray a good husband, lest you share Blodeuwedd's fate, and at the same time caution their sons: do not assume a wife has no will of her own, lest you create another Blodeuwedd. The name Blodeuwedd became synonymous with both betrayal and a certain forlorn romance. For some listeners she was a villain,
who deserved her transformation. For others she was a victim of being shaped and used by men with no say in her own destiny. The debates about her nature would persist down the ages. In the old texts, it is simply noted that Blodeuwedd lived out her days as an owl, a creature hated. And now, my dear wanderer of the night, you know why the owl cries. You know why her wings shiver in the moonlight. You know the sorrow stitched into every feather. A flower-born girl who wanted freedom. A prince who wanted love. A choice that shattered them both. Tell me in the comments what part stayed with you, and subscribe to the temple to keep the torches lit for the next story. Close your eyes now. Let the night settle around you, like a cloak woven from story and shadow. Let Nyx press a gentle hand over your tired thoughts. Breathe, slow, quieter now, and drift into the dark. For even in tragedy there is a kind of peace, the soft final quiet after the story ends. Sleep well, wanderer. Nyx watches.